You've tried to stop overthinking. You've told yourself just let it go. You've tried to focus on something else and none of it's worked. Here's why. You're trying to stop a brain process with the same brain that's running it. Here's a statistic that should make you feel better about overthinking. Your brain generates tens and thousands of thoughts a day. If you're aware of more of them than most people, that's not a flaw. That's just heightened metacognition. The problem isn't volume, it's what happens next. Overthinking isn't a personality trait, it's a neurological pattern, a specific loop involving 3 structures in your brain. And once you understand how that loop works, you can interrupt it at 3 different points. You don't have to stop thinking. You just have to change what your brain does with the thought once it actually arrives. So let me walk you through the biology of overthinking loop. And at each step, I'll give you the evidence-based tool that breaks it. By the end, you'll have a protocol, not just advice. Your brain has a network called the default mode network. It activates when you're not doing anything in particular. When you're laying in bed, when you're in the shower, when you're driving a familiar route, it's your brain's idle state. The default mode network is where self-referential thoughts live. What does this say about me? What if I made the wrong choice? Why did I say that 3 years ago? When the default mode network is overactive, you get stuck here. A loop of analyzing yourself and your past without any resolution. Here's what's critical. The default mode network and your task positive network, the part that activates when you're actually doing something, can't both be fully online at the same time. They suppress one another. This is why distractions sometimes works. When you're deeply engaged in a task, the default mode network quiets down. But distraction isn't the best intervention because the moment you stop, the default mode network fires right back up again. What you need is something that specifically deactivates it. So research done in the neuroscience of mindfulness has shown that focused attention, particularly on sensory input, directly suppresses the default mode network activity. This isn't about clearing your mind. It's about redirecting your brain's processing power to something more concrete. The simplest version, when you catch yourself overthinking, name 5 things you can see right now. Not in your head, out loud if you can. You're looking at a white wall, maybe a blue mug, a green plant, black keyboard. You're forcing your brain out of that default mode network and into sensory processing. It's a neurological overdrive and it's not willpower. Here's where most people get stuck. They try to reason their way out of overthinking. I know this isn't rational. There's no evidence that's true. I should just let it go. The problem? Overthinking isn't happening in your prefrontal cortex, your logical brain. It's being driven by your amygdala, which doesn't respond to logic. The amygdala responds to one thing, whether it feels safe. When you're overthinking, what's actually happening is your amygdala has detected a threat, a social threat, a future uncertainty, a past mistake. And it's keeping your brain in problem-solving mode because it thinks there's a problem to solve. Your prefrontal cortex is just along for a ride, generating explanations for a fear it didn't create. This is why telling yourself it's going to be fine doesn't work. You're using prefrontal cortex to try to override the amygdala, and your amygdala doesn't speak that same language. It speaks body sensation. So here's the intervention. When you notice the spiral, stop trying to think your way out of it. Instead, do something your amygdala will register as safety. Extend the exhale. Here we are, back at breathing. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. That ratio activates the vagus nerve, which sends direct calming signals to the amygdala. Or put your hand on your chest. This is something I've talked about in my previous videos. Your nervous system registers physical pressure as containment. It's not about the thoughts. It's about signal your body sends to your brain. There's a concept in acceptance commitment therapy called cognitive fusion. It's when you're so fused with your thoughts that you can't see them as thoughts. They feel like reality. I'm going to fail isn't experienced as thought you're having. It's experienced as a prediction that's probably true. Cognitive fusion is what makes overthinking feel so urgent. If every worrying thought might be a genuine warning, you can't afford to ignore any of them. Your brain treats every what if like an incoming threat report. The intervention for this is called cognitive defusion, creating distance between you and the thought. And there's a dead simple version that neuroscience supports. Add the phrase, I'm having the thought that before whatever your brain is saying. Okay, so add the phrase, I'm having the thought that, before whatever your brain is saying. Instead of, I'm going to mess up this presentation, it becomes, I'm having the thought that I'm going to mess up this presentation. That small linguistic shift does something measurable in the brain. It activates your prefrontal monitoring system rather than your amygdala. You're observing the thought instead of being fully inside it. Another version that works, say the thought out loud in a silly voice. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but there's a reason why this works. When you change the acoustic properties of thought, your brain reprocesses it differently. You're disrupting the fusion by making the thoughts sound foreign. Try it once, you'll see what I mean. Most people think overthinking happens entirely in the head. It doesn't. Your body's part of that loop. Here's how it works. An anxious thought triggers a physical response. Tight chest, shallow breathing, muscle tension. Your brain then scans your body, feels the tension, and thinks something must be wrong because my body is in a threat mode. That triggers more anxious thoughts, which creates more tension, which your brain reads as more evidence of danger. It's a feedback loop between your mind and the body, and you can't break it by only addressing the mind side. The intervention is to disrupt the loop at the body level as well. Progressive muscle relaxation, systematically tensing and relaxing muscle group, has been studied extensively and does something specific. It reduces the somatic arousal signal your brain is using as evidence of threat. So when your muscles release, your brain gets different data. You can do a micro version of this anywhere. Notice where you're holding tension, usually jaw, shoulders, or hand. Tense that area deliberately for 5 seconds, then release. The contrast between the tension and the release is a signal your brain needs to reevaluate. One cycle won't stop overthinking forever, but it interrupts the loop, and interrupting the loop is the first step of breaking it. This is going to sound backwards, but it's one of the most evidence-supported interventions for chronic overthinking. It's called scheduled worry time, or sometimes called the paradoxical intervention for anxiety. Here's our logic. Your brain has learned that worrying is a problem-solving activity. It thinks if it just keeps running the simulation, it will find a solution. When you try to suppress the worry, your brain fights back even harder because from its perspective, you're trying to stop it from solving a real problem. Scheduled worry time works differently. Instead of fighting the worry, you contain it. You set aside 15 minutes a day, same time, same place, and you give yourself permission to worry as intensely as you want. Write down every fear, every catastrophic predictions, every spiral. Go all in. What happens? When a worry time shows up at 2, you write it down and tell yourself, hey, I'll handle this at 4:30 during worry time. Your brain accepts the deferral because it trusts that you're actually going to do it. And by the time worry time arrives, half the worries that felt urgent at 2 p.m. no longer feel as charged. You're training your brain that not every worry needs immediate attention. The research on this is solid. Studies from Penn State and elsewhere show scheduled worry time significantly reduces both the frequency and intensity of intrusive thoughts. It's not suppression, it's structure. Overthinking isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that your worry is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Scan for threats, solve problems, keep you safe. The issue isn't that the system exists, it's that the system is hyperactive and poorly calibrated. You now have 5 ways to interrupt it. Sensory redirection for the default mode network, vagal signaling for the amygdala, cognitive defusion for thought fusion, somatic release for the body loop, and scheduled worry time for the urgency cycle. You don't need all 5 at once. Pick the one that feels most accessible and try it the next time the spiral starts. If this gave you a framework that actually makes sense and what's happening in your brain, share it with someone who's been told to just stop overthinking. And follow us for more. We're building a community around the science of what actually works.